This is the day we've been waiting for. The Senate passed the landmark immigration bill 68-32, finally pushing it to the Republican-controlled House of Representatives. 14 Republicans joined all of the Democrats in approving the legislation, and no Democrats voted against it. The overhaul focuses on the following issues: border security, a pathway to citizenship, legal immigration, interior enforcement, and temporary visas. The Senate had plenty of back and forth today. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid said this. He said it's a landmark legislation that will secure our borders and help 11 million people get right with the law. Then Majority Leader Mitch McConnell countered by saying, this bill may pass the Senate today, but not with my vote, and in its current form, it won't become law. He says the bill doesn't ensure true border security because those here illegally could obtain a provisional legal status before any security goals are made. The bill's next stop is the Republican-controlled House. House Speaker John Boehner was vocal today as well.
The House is not going to take up and vote on whatever the Senate passes. We're going to do our own bill through regular order, and it'll be legislation that reflects the will of our majority and the will of the American people.
The will of the Republican majority and the will of the American people. I'm pretty sure we'll never get those things to match up ever, Mr. Speaker, as if we haven't fought an impossible enough battle already. Joining us from Atlanta to break down the immigration bill is Jason Johnson. He's a professor at Hiram University and chief political correspondent of Politic365.com. Welcome back to the War Room, Jason.
Always glad to be here.
All right, well, we like having you, and there's some interesting things to talk about across the board. Yesterday, the Corker-Hoven Amendment bolstering border security passed with support from 15 Republicans. But GOP support for something similar in the House is really unlikely. House Speaker Boehner said this: I have no intention of putting a bill on the floor that the people in this room do not believe secures our borders. It's not going to happen. So what would be an acceptable bill, Jason, for GOP House members?
I don't think there is an acceptable bill. We can start playing taps right now. This bill is going to die in the House. The motivation in the Senate to passing this bill has to do with larger economic, political, and presidential aspirations of senators. Look, senators are thinking about running for president. They're thinking about having to win their entire states where the Latino population is growing. Members of Congress don't care about that. Their districts are gerrymandered so that they don't have to deal with different groups of people. So the likelihood that there's any bill that the Republican House will ever pass is next to nil. This thing is dead on arrival when it hits the House.
Yeah, and I guess the way that they have to think about it, or some of them have to think about it, because you're so right, is in a sort of bigger picture way that their party, in order to get the White House back, in order to get a majority in the Senate, they're going to have to support some things that Americans are going to want. And those districts, as gerrymandered as they are going to change over the course of time. It's just so frustrating to see it happen the way it does. Now, the main concern for Republicans, of course, is the pathway to citizenship. Those opposed to it say that it will harm the economy, but according to the Center for American Progress, a pathway to citizenship would elevate the wages of these newly legalized immigrants by 25% and increase the wages of U.S.-born workers as well. We had David K. Johnson on last week. He was saying that even Douglas Holtz-Eakin, who was Mitt Romney's chief economist, agrees with these numbers. So is there any truth to the rest of the GOP fiction we're hearing?
Well, let me see. The biggest fear of a pathway to citizenship is a pathway to voting, and voting for Democrats and putting Republicans out of office. That's all they really care about. Look, this whole idea, this ridiculous nativism that's going on right now, it has its roots in sort of racial bias. It has its roots in a general sort of hostility to bringing more people into sort of the American public. And that's what it really boils down to. Everyone knows that if you start making people citizens and they have to pay taxes and they have to get paid above the table instead of below the table, it ends up lifting all boats. Republicans know about the economy. This is about race. It's about not winning Latino voters more so than anything about the economy.
Yeah, well, now maybe you'll get some Republicans to vote for it, because I totally believe with you. I would go further. I would say it is just pure out-and-out racism that creates even an immigration issue to begin with, and that the economy is a straw dog, but the straw man. The straw dog, by the way, a good movie, but straw man. The whole idea, though, is that now that the Supreme Court ruled the way they did on voting rights, well, hell, let them in, let them become citizens. We'll just stop them
them.
from voting because we have the court. So there's that way of looking at it. Maybe that'll get Republicans to do it.
I mean, to be perfectly honest, the Republicans are at a really critical point right now. You have millennials who are, now ensconced in the voting system. You have this huge specter of a Hillary Clinton who's extremely popular with the Latino community running in 2016. And they have an opportunity here to really change the reputation of their party or face extinction for another 8 years. Not doing anything about the Voting Rights Act, part of the Voting Rights Act being eliminated, keeping Latinos from becoming citizens, continuing to fight these ridiculous battles in Texas and Ohio about abortion. These are the kinds of things that are going to keep the Republican Party in trouble. And there's but so many years that they can keep relying on gerrymandering from 2010 to protect them. Eventually, this is going to have electoral consequences at the voting booth.
Yeah, I can't not. I mean, that's what happens. So
right.
Let's look. Same-sex marriage, voting rights, affirmative action, and immigration are all major headlines of the week. Why are we still having, Jason, these 20th century fights, some of them 19th century fights, and not winning them handily?
Because you still have some people who are kicking and screaming into the 21st century. And it's a waste of time, really. I mean, it's a waste of time. You've got some people who just can't stand it, can't believe it. And I think gay marriage is a classic example of this. I don't think that most Democrats are really in favor of gay marriage. I don't think that Barack Obama is in favor of gay marriage necessarily, not in his personal life. I don't think he'd be thrilled if one of his daughters came out of the closet. I don't think he'd necessarily be happy with that. A lot of Americans aren't. But it's about liberty. And gay marriage is one of those issues that is symbolic to voters about what kind of personal liberty are we going to allow the government, is the government going to allow people to have? So the Republicans, in fighting those kinds of battles, are simply fighting against liberty, and that's something that's never going to win you votes.
Yeah, it's never going to win Republican votes. I don't know that I agree with you about the president, but it doesn't really matter because it is about liberty. That your thesis
right.
is exactly right. I want to switch topics because you have been covering very closely something that's on the minds of a lot of Americans, or certainly on the televisions of a lot of Americans. That's the Trayvon Martin trial. The prosecution's key witness, Rachel Jeantel, was Martin's friend who was on the phone with him just moments before he was killed. She was only 18 years old at the time. What's your interpretation, Jason, of how Zimmerman's defense, the media, and the public is treating this witness?
It's a Rorschach test. I mean, people's reactions to her have everything to do with why we're watching this case to begin with, because it has to do with profiling. She is a not particularly educated, plus-size, dark-skinned black woman. And some people inherently, the moment that she got on stage, on my Twitter feed, on Facebook and online, there are tons of people who are saying, oh my gosh, she's not credible, and look at how she's dressed, and she's ignorant, whatever else. And there are other people who say, well, look, she looks like any other teenager. She's a high school senior. Of course she's surly. Of course she's not happy to be there. Of course any kid doesn't want to get on stage on national television and say a boy I had a crush on got killed, and now I have to relate that story for 4.5 hours while being cross-examined. So I think it's a real testament to how America views young people, and it crosses across gender, race, and really if you have kids or not.
Yeah, and you don't have to be a kid to hate being badgered by an attorney in cross-examination.
Exactly.
You see adults do it too. Quickly before you leave, you've been tweeting the trial and sharing your 2 cents. You tweeted this morning, come on, are we really going to explain the black experience? A white guy is following a black kid in the early evening. Tell us about this tweet. What are some of the most frustrating, things about this that speak to the racial divide that still exists in this country?
Well, the absolute ignorance on the part of the defense. Look, George Zimmerman, by the law, is innocent until proven guilty. But when the defense is sitting there asking this young woman, and he asks her, well, how did you know it was racial? And she sits there with this expression. She's like, this white guy is following my friend. If you're a young African-American teenager, if you are a black adult, as I am, getting followed around stores, restaurants, and the parking lot is not uncommon in certain parts of this country. And I think that sort of tone deafness is one of the reasons that we really still haven't had enough progress in this country in how race is lived, in the nuanced way that it's experienced by older people, younger people, Generation Xers, and certainly that isn't something understood by the defense.
Yeah, and social media shines a very, very, I would say, embarrassing light on that hadn't been shined before. So I think that's
right.
a really great takeaway from that. Jason Johnson of Politics 365. We look forward to the next time you're in the War Room.